Hello everyone, and thank you for watching this presentation. My name is Ian Hamley. This presentation marks the 12-month anniversary of my deployment to Manitoba, Canada during the 2025 wildfire season. Between the 14th of July and the 18th of August 2025, I was deployed as Operations Chief as part of an Australian incident management team supporting Manitoba Wildfire Service. Over the next 40 minutes or so, I'd like to share some of the experiences from that deployment, the challenges faced, the people, and some of the lessons I brought home. I would like to introduce the Australian team that I had the honour and privilege to work with. Peter Hartley, Incident Commander, Western Australian Department of Biodiversity, Conservation and Attractions. Linda Overend, Planning Chief, Tasmanian Parks and Wildlife Service. Anne-Marie Smith, Logistics Chief, Tasmanian Parks and Wildlife Service. Myself, Ian Hamley, Operations Chief, Country Fire Authority, Victoria. Matt James, Airbase Manager, Tasmanian Parks and Wildlife Service. Stephen Nicholson, Safety Officer, Tasmanian Parks and Wildlife Service. Mick Ritchie, Divisional Supervisor, Department of Energy, Environment and Climate Action, Victoria. While the fires themselves were significant, the real story is about leadership, teamwork, aviation operations, cultural understanding, and the value of international cooperation during large-scale emergencies. To understand why international assistance was needed, it's important to first understand the scale of the wildfire situation facing Manitoba. When I arrived in Manitoba, one of the first things that struck me was the sheer scale of the landscape. While Victoria covers around 227,000 square kilometres, Manitoba is almost 3 times larger at approximately 647,000 square kilometres. Much of northern Manitoba is made up of remote boreal forest, lakes and wetlands with very limited road access. In Victoria, we often take communications, roads and nearby resources for granted. In Manitoba, many fires were hundreds of kilometres from the nearest community and could only be accessed by helicopter. The fire behaviour was also different. Large fires could burn across vast areas of continuous forest for weeks or months, with very few natural barriers. This meant aviation was not simply supporting operations, it was enabling them. Understanding these differences is important because it explains why so much of our effort focused on aircraft, logistics, communications, and remote crew operations throughout the deployment. The 2025 wildfire season was one of the most significant in the province's history. Hundreds of fires burned across northern Manitoba, with many growing to very large sizes under prolonged hot, dry and windy conditions. As you can see from the map, active fires were spread across a vast area of the province, particularly in the northern regions where access is difficult and communities are often remote. The area around Thompson became a major focus for suppression operations because several large fires were threatening critical infrastructure, Indigenous communities, and important transport corridors. As the season intensified, local resources became stretched and assistance was requested through the Canadian Interagency Forest Fire Centre. Firefighters and incident management personnel arrived from across Canada and around the world, including Australia, Mexico, New Zealand, South Africa and the United States. This deployment demonstrated the strength of international cooperation, with agencies from many countries working together under a common incident command system. Getting to Manitoba was a significant journey in itself and highlighted just how remote the operational area really was. Travelling from Australia to Manitoba was a reminder of just how large Canada really is. The journey involved multiple flights covering 16,400 kilometres before we finally arrived in Winnipeg. Then a 9-hour road trip to get to Thompson. Canada can look relatively compact on a map, but the reality is very different. Manitoba alone is enormous, and many of the communities affected by wildfire are located hundreds of kilometres from major population centres. One of my first impressions was the sheer scale of the boreal forest. Looking out of the aircraft window as we flew across Canada, it seemed endless. Unlike Victoria, where roads, towns and farmland regularly break up the landscape, northern Manitoba is dominated by vast forests, lakes and remote wilderness areas. It quickly became obvious why aviation would play such a critical role in firefighting operations. When we arrived in Thompson, we discovered the incident management team would need to operate from 2 separate locations. A unique aspect of the operation was that the incident management team was split across 2 separate locations. The provincial building in Thompson housed incident command, planning, logistics and safety, while operations were based at Thompson Airport in what was known as Area 55. Area 55 Advanced Cold Research Facility is located within the secure precinct of the Thompson Regional Airport in Thompson, Manitoba. Established in 2023, it was developed as a world-class cold weather testing centre where manufacturers can test vehicles, equipment, drones, robotics and other technologies in genuine sub-Arctic conditions, 0 degrees Celsius, making it one of North America's premier cold weather testing locations. Office space, meeting rooms and training facilities. Supports testing of vehicles, aviation equipment, drones, robotics and emerging technologies. Winter season, reliable snow cover and frequent temperatures below -20 degrees Celsius. This location made an ideal operations command centre. Most of the operational activity depended on aviation resources. Helicopters were constantly moving crews, conducting reconnaissance flights, transporting supplies, and supporting firefighting operations. Being located at the airport allowed operations to work directly alongside air operations and aviation support personnel. This close relationship between operations and aviation became one of the defining features of the deployment. In many respects, aviation wasn't simply supporting the operation, it was enabling it. Without aircraft, many of the fires simply could not have been managed effectively. In my role as Operations Chief, I was responsible for coordinating all tactical operations across the incident. The role involved implementing the incident action plan, allocating resources, setting operational priorities, and ensuring all activities were conducted safely. We were managing local Canadian firefighters, Cree Nation firefighters, Quebec firefighters, and Mexican firefighters across multiple fires and a very large operational area. Every day involved balancing competing priorities, changing fire behaviour, aviation availability, and firefighter safety. It was very rewarding seeing people from different countries, cultures, and backgrounds come together as a single team. Despite speaking different languages, everyone shared the same goal: protecting communities and bringing the fires under control. To manage all of that complexity, I relied heavily on a surprisingly simple tool: the Operations Chief Whiteboard. This board became the centre of our operational planning process. While it may look fairly simple, it provided a real-time picture of resources, crew locations, aviation assignments, and operational priorities. Throughout the day, information was updated as crews reported progress, completed objectives, or encountered new challenges. By late afternoon, the board became the foundation for planning the following day's operations. It helped identify resource requirements, crew movements, aviation needs, and operational priorities. The information captured here flowed directly into the incident action plan that was produced each evening by the planning section. In many ways, this simple whiteboard connected operations, planning, logistics, and aviation operations. It ensured everyone was working from the same page and helped maintain situational awareness across a very complex incident. Of course, managing crews was made even more interesting because we were working across multiple languages and cultures. What impressed me most during the deployment was the truly international nature of the firefighting effort. The fireground included large numbers of Spanish-speaking firefighters from Mexico and French-speaking firefighters from Quebec. To ensure everyone clearly understood operational objectives and safety information, daily briefings were conducted in the crew's own languages. Incident action plans were translated and printed in Spanish, French, and English. The briefings covered operational objectives, sector assignments, weather conditions, aviation activity, safety messages, and contingency plans. Despite language differences, everyone operated within the same incident command system framework. That common structure allowed firefighters from different countries and cultures to work together effectively and safely. It was a great example of how large incidents bring people together from around the world in pursuit of a common goal. Those communications help build something equally important: strong relationships. It was truly an honour to have the opportunity to work directly with firefighters from different countries and cultures. This photograph was taken with members of the Mexican and Quebec crews before they deployed to the Fireline. While we came from different backgrounds and spoke different languages, we were united by a common purpose. As operations chief, it was important for me to spend time with crews in the field, not only to understand the challenges they faced, but also to build trust and relationships. Effective wildfire management is not simply about plans, aircraft, and equipment. It's about people. Strong relationships improve communication, strengthen teamwork, and ultimately lead to safer and more effective operations. This photo represents one of the greatest strengths of the Manitoba wildfire response: different nations working together as one team. One group that made an enormous contribution to the operation was the Mexican firefighting crews. Working alongside the Mexican crews was a privilege. These firefighters brought a tremendous amount of experience, professionalism, and determination to the incident. The photos on this slide show some of the work they carried out. Much of their effort involved locating and extinguishing deep-seated hotspots, reinforcing containment lines, and undertaking lengthy mop-up operations. This work is physically demanding and often carried out in difficult conditions. Despite language differences, their teamwork and cooperation were outstanding. I was continually impressed by their work ethic, discipline, and willingness to take on difficult assignments. Their contribution played a significant role in the success of the operation. Regardless of where firefighters came from, one message remained constant throughout the deployment: safety comes first. One of the strongest messages throughout the deployment was that safety always came first. This photo shows firefighters receiving a helicopter safety briefing before deployment to the Fireline. Many operational areas could only be accessed by aircraft, so aviation safety was part of everyday life. Each time a different helicopter was introduced into the operation, crews were briefed on loading procedures, emergency actions, communications, and safety around operating helicopters. The image on the right highlights another critical aviation safety message: staying clear of drop zones. Large air tankers and helicopters regularly operated above firefighters on the ground, conducting water and retardant drops. Everyone needed to understand the aircraft warning signals, maintain communications, and know exactly what to do when aircraft were approaching. Throughout the deployment, we often repeated a simple principle: no task is so urgent that it cannot be done safely. That principle guided every operational decision we made. With safety systems established, our operational focus during the first week quickly centred on a fire that threatened one of the most important pieces of infrastructure in the region: Thompson Airport. During our first week in Manitoba, Fire 61 quickly became our highest operational priority. The reason was simple. Fire 61 was threatening Thompson Airport, which was the centre of aviation operations for the entire region. Every day, aircraft were transporting firefighters, equipment, supplies, and incident management personnel throughout northern Manitoba. If we lost the airport, we would have lost our ability to move resources efficiently across multiple incidents. As a result, protecting Thompson Airport became a strategic priority from day one. Ground crews, heavy equipment operators, aviation resources, and incident management personnel all focused on ensuring the airport remained operational. The decisions made during that first week helped shape many of our operational priorities for the remainder of the deployment. Protecting the airport wasn't just about protecting infrastructure, it was about protecting the operation itself. To achieve that objective, significant protection measures were put in place around the airport precinct. To reduce the risk, extensive fire guards were constructed using heavy machinery. Large areas of vegetation were removed to create defensible space around the airport perimeter. An industrial-scale sprinkler system was also installed around critical infrastructure and vulnerable sections of the airport boundary. These sprinklers could operate continuously, increasing humidity and reducing the likelihood of ignition. The combination of heavy machinery, sprinkler systems, aviation resources, and ground crews ultimately ensured the airport remained operational throughout the threat period. Protecting Thompson Airport was one of the most important strategic successes of the deployment. Supporting that effort required a diverse range of aviation resources. Aviation wasn't simply supporting the firefighting effort. It was the backbone of the operation. The Chinook helicopters shown here were true workhorses. They could lift 9,000-litre buckets and were instrumental in supporting ground crews. The Manitoba water bombers played a critical role in protecting key assets ahead of advancing fire. Light helicopters were used for reconnaissance, intelligence gathering, crew transport, and operational support. The medium helicopter was the main mode of transporting crews and supplies to the fireground. Every day, aircraft moved people, equipment, food, fuel, and supplies across vast distances. Without aviation, many of the fires we were managing would have been virtually inaccessible. Every morning began with aircraft. Every evening ended with aircraft. They connected every part of the operation. Of course, moving people was only one challenge. Communicating with them was another. Many of the fires were located in extremely remote parts of northern Manitoba, where communications infrastructure was limited or non-existent. Mobile phone coverage was largely restricted to communities and major transport routes. Once crews were deployed to the Fireline, they were often completely out of cellular range. Internet connectivity could also be unreliable, even at our headquarters. Radio communications presented their own challenges due to distance, terrain, and limited repeater coverage. Because of these limitations, aviation became critical for maintaining situational awareness and communications with the crews on the ground. Daily helicopter flights often served as our communications network. The operations chief and the divisional supervisor gathered intelligence, checked on crews, and relayed information back to the incident management team during their daily fights over the firegrounds. In remote wildfire operations, reliable communications cannot be taken for granted. Those communication challenges reinforce the importance of understanding the communities we were protecting. It's important to understand the community we were working alongside. Nisichawaisit Cree Nation is a proud Indigenous community with a deep connection to the surrounding landscape. One of the most valuable experiences of the deployment was meeting with the elders and community leaders of the Cree Nation people. The conversations we had with them provided insights that maps and operational plans simply couldn't provide. We learned about culturally significant locations, traditional areas, and community values that were significant to the Cree Nation people and required protection. Those discussions directly influenced our operational priorities. They helped us understand that we weren't simply protecting buildings and infrastructure. We were protecting culture, history, and community identity. The Cree Nation community leaders helped us understand what mattered most to their community. One location that was repeatedly identified as being particularly important was Mile 20. Fire 50 became one of the most significant fires threatening Nissachawai Cree Nation and surrounding traditional lands. During discussions with elders and community representatives, one location was consistently identified as a priority. That location was Mile 20. To many people looking at a map, it may appear to be just another location within the fire footprint. For the Cree Nation community, however, it held cultural, historical, and community significance. The conversations we had influenced the way we approached our planning. Resources were allocated not only based on fire behaviour, but also on community values. Ground crews, heavy machinery, and aviation resources were committed to constructing fire guards and implementing protection strategies around Mile 20. Fortunately, those efforts were successful. This was one of the most important lessons of the deployment. Emergency management is not just about managing the fire. It's about protecting what communities value most. Another location that quickly became a major priority was Left Rook Cultural Camp. Left Rook Cultural Camp was one of the most rewarding protection projects I was involved in during the deployment. Located on Left Rook Lake and hosted by the Cree Nation, the camp was much more than a collection of buildings. It was a place where cultural knowledge, traditions, and where community connections maintained and shared. As Fire 50 grew and Fire 62 approached, the threat to the camp increased significantly. Direct firefighting operations around the camp would have exposed crews to unacceptable levels of risk. Instead, we developed a protection strategy based on long hose lays, portable pumps, and extensive sprinkler systems. These systems were installed well before the fire arrived. As conditions deteriorated, everyone was anxious to see whether the protection measures would work. Fortunately, they did. The camp survived and was successfully protected. Protecting Left Rook was one of the achievements that I often reflect upon from the deployment. At the same time, the overall fire situation was continuing to escalate. As the season progressed, Fire 62 continued to grow under the influence of dry fuels, strong winds, and ongoing fire activity. Initially, Fire 50 and Fire 62 were managed as separate incidents. Over time, however, it became increasingly clear that they were on a path to merge. When the two fires joined, the operational picture changed dramatically. What had previously been two large incidents became one much larger and more complex fire environment. The merger increased the threat to communities, cultural sites, and critical infrastructure. From an operations perspective, this required constant reassessment of priorities, resource allocation, and suppression strategies. The protection work completed around Mile 20 and Left Rook became even more important as fire activity intensified. As we all know, wildfire doesn't recognise boundaries on a map. Fire behaviour ultimately dictates the shape and size of the incident. Managing fires of this scale required crews to work in some extremely remote locations. Many crews were operating in remote wilderness areas with no road access whatsoever. The only way in and out was by helicopter. Everything had to be flown in. Food, fuel, pumps, hoses, camping equipment, even basic personal supplies. Crews often remained on the Fireline for extended periods and were resupplied every 3 days by aircraft. As Fire 50 and Fire 62 merged, conditions on the ground changed rapidly. Fire intensity increased and fire behaviour became increasingly unpredictable. There were occasions when operational objectives had to change immediately and crews needed to be extracted from the Fireline before conditions became unsafe. These decisions reinforced an important principle: no task is more important than firefighter safety. Supporting those crews required a substantial logistics system and a considerable amount of equipment. These photos show some of the equipment used by firefighting crews during the deployment. Portable pumps and 38mm hose lays form the backbone of suppression operations. Crews established extensive hose networks around assets and along fire edges. Chainsaws, hand tools, fuel, maintenance equipment and camping gear all had to be transported by aircraft. Once crews were established on the Fireline, they were resupplied approximately every 3 days, and twice daily reconnaissance flights were maintained for welfare checks and situation updates. Additional fuel, food and equipment were delivered as required. This logistics system allowed crews to operate safely and effectively in some of the most remote environments I have ever encountered. Every hose, every pump, every litre of fuel, every meal arrived by aircraft. Of course, supporting international crews in those conditions created another level of complexity. The international and out-of-province firefighting crews were transported to and from the Fireline each day and needed accommodation away from the Fireline. The Mexican crews were accommodated at Area 55, which was our operations base at Thompson Airport. The Quebec crews were based in Thompson and stayed at a local school that had been converted into firefighter accommodation in the gymnasium. Every day, these crews had to be transported to and from remote Fireline locations. This created a complex aviation operation every single day. Weather, visibility, and aircraft availability all had to be considered before crews could be deployed. If the helicopters couldn't fly, the crews couldn't get in, and more importantly, they couldn't get out. One of the biggest challenges was smoke. Conditions could change quickly, so weather and aviation operations were monitored constantly throughout the day. Supporting these crews required constant monitoring of aircraft and weather conditions, which leads directly to one of our biggest daily challenges. Aviation was critical to the success of the operation. If the helicopters couldn't fly, crews couldn't reach the Fireline and couldn't be extracted safely. The challenge was that Thompson Airport remained a fully operational domestic airport throughout the incident. Every day we were coordinating wildfire helicopters, fixed-wing support aircraft, water bombers and domestic passenger services operating from the same airport. Weather became one of our biggest operational considerations. Smoke could rapidly reduce visibility, sometimes within a matter of minutes in ground aircraft. Before deploying crews, we needed confidence that aircraft would be able to return and retrieve them if conditions deteriorated. Every morning started with weather, visibility, aircraft availability, and a risk assessment. No operational objective was worth compromising aviation and crew safety. Fortunately, we did manage to get a short break from the fires about halfway through the deployment. After 2 weeks of smoke, aircraft operations and managing multiple fires, it was an opportunity to recharge and reset. The local Thompson Fire Chief very generously organised a fishing trip for the Australian Incident Management Team at Paint Lake. Paint Lake is a beautiful part of northern Manitoba and gave us an opportunity to experience a side of Canada that we have never seen. The locals certainly knew where the fish were. We spent the day on the water and managed to catch quite a few fish, pickerel. But what made the day special wasn't just the fishing. It was the chance to spend time with local community members who had welcomed us into their region. The generosity and hospitality of the people of northern Manitoba was incredible. The break was appreciated, but the fires certainly hadn't stopped, and we were soon back to operational duties. Looking back, there were a number of achievements from the deployment that stand out that I still reflect upon today. Over 5 weeks, our team worked alongside Canadian, Cree Nation, Quebec and Mexican personnel to manage several large and complex wildfire incidents. One of our highest priorities was protecting Thompson Airport, which remained operational throughout the threat period. We also successfully protected culturally significant locations, including Mile 20 and Left Rook Cultural Camp. These sites held enormous importance for Cree Nation community. The operation required the coordination of ground crews, aviation resources, heavy machinery and logistics across a vast and remote landscape. Despite difficult conditions, crews operated safely and effectively throughout the deployment, and building relationships with firefighters and from different countries, cultures and languages working together as one team. Those achievements led directly to several important lessons that continue to influence how I approach emergency management today. Several lessons from my deployment to Canada continue to stay with me. The first is the importance of understanding community values. Successful incident management isn't just about protecting infrastructure. It's about understanding what matters most to the people we serve. The second lesson was the critical role of aviation. It was the backbone of the operation. The third lesson was leadership in a multinational environment, building relationships. Success depended on trust, communication, and respect. The fourth lesson was learning to operate when technology is limited. Sometimes strong relationships and face-to-face communication are more valuable than sophisticated technology. And finally, the most important lesson, emergency management is ultimately about people. Our deployment was over, but before heading home, however, we managed to experience one final piece of Canadian culture. On our last night in Canada, we managed to get tickets to a Canadian Football League game in Winnipeg. After 5 weeks of managing wildfires, it was a fantastic opportunity to experience a uniquely Canadian sporting event. The Winnipeg Blue Bombers were playing the Calgary Stampeders, and the atmosphere was incredible. By this stage, we had developed strong friendships with our fellow incident management team members, and it was a great way to celebrate the successful completion of our deployment. It was my first experience watching Canadian football, which is a little different from the football we're used to at home, but it was a great way to wrap up our deployment. Little did we know that the real adventure was still ahead of us. The following day, the Air Canada strike turned our journey home into one final logistical challenge. After 5 weeks in Manitoba, we were finally heading home. The original plan was simple: drive from Thompson to Winnipeg, catch a domestic flight to Vancouver, and then an international flight to Sydney, Australia. Unfortunately, things didn't quite go according to plan. The first part went well. We got to Winnipeg, saw a game of football on Wednesday night, then flew to Vancouver the next day. Part 1 completed. However, just as we were preparing to board our Air Canada flight to Sydney, Air Canada industrial action began affecting flights across the country, and our flight was cancelled. What was supposed to be a routine journey quickly became another logistical challenge. Instead of travelling to Sydney, we were rerouted onto a Fiji Airways flight. So from Vancouver, we eventually made our way to Nadi, Fiji, where we spent around 12 hours waiting for our next connection at the airport. From there, we flew to Brisbane. I caught a connecting flight to Melbourne that same night, while the rest of the team stayed over in Brisbane for the night. But the journey still wasn't finished. A fellow brigade member from Portland kindly met me at Melbourne Airport, and we completed the final leg by road to Portland. So after leaving Canada on Thursday, I was home again Monday morning. As it turned out, I wasn't the only thing that struggled to get home. Just when I thought the adventure was over, my luggage decided it was staying in Canada. Because of the Air Canada strike and all the flight disruptions, my bags never made it onto the Fiji flight. While I arrived home as planned, my luggage remained in Vancouver. After some follow-up by the Australian International Liaison Officer, my bags did finally get home 2 weeks later. Thankfully, my luggage was the only casualty of the deployment. As I look back on the experience, it's not the luggage delay I remember the most. It is the people. I had the privilege and honour of working alongside Canadian, Cree Nation, Quebec and Mexican firefighters, pilots, incident management personnel and community leaders. Despite coming from different countries and cultures, everyone shared the same commitment to protecting communities and supporting one another. The fires that threatened Thompson, Mile 20 and the Left Rook Cultural Camp have long since been extinguished. The fire guards have grown over. The hose and sprinkler systems have been packed away, and the aircraft have returned to their normal duties. What remains are the lessons we learned and the relationships we built. This deployment reinforced the importance of leadership, community engagement, cultural understanding, trust, and teamwork. The fires are out, but the lessons learned and the friendships formed remain. I would like to take this opportunity to thank Manitoba Wildfire Service, Cree Nation people, the Canadian, Quebec and Mexican firefighting crews, my fellow Australian incident management team members, and most importantly the families, employers and volunteers who supported me while deployed overseas. It was an honour to represent Australia, a privilege to represent the Country Fire Authority, and proud to showcase Portland Fire Brigade on the world stage. Thank you for your time.